Were you any good to hurl, Alan Quinlan?
I wasn't too bad, Johnny. No, I wasn't too bad. I was certainly grew up in a county that you had to take a hurley into your hand and try it out anyway. But I did play lots of hurling when I was younger. Yeah, loved it.
Alan is, of course, host of the Red 78 podcast. Difficult time to be a rugby fan at the moment.
Well, it is, I suppose. It is challenging where all these fixtures are going to end up between the URC and the Champions Cup, which is due to get back. Champions Cup next weekend again. And will there be a format change? Will these games go ahead? It's kind of crazy at the moment, but it's the same in all sport at the moment. So hopefully it passes pretty soon and they find weekends for these postponed games.
Let's get straight to it. Your back row depth chart.
Yeah, my back row depth chart for Ireland. Where should we start?
Start at number 6, Quinny. We'll go 6, 7, 8 here.
Yeah, well, look, I was trying to think over this. There's I went through all the provinces really, and who's available, who's Irish qualified, who are the bolters, who's playing well at the moment. It's kind of difficult ones to, and some of it may be a little bit unfair because we haven't seen many games in the last few weeks, and I've always said the interpros are a great barometer for and a test for fellas who are trying to make that Irish squad. The number 6 that finished played against the All Blacks, I suppose, and finished played brilliantly in November was Caelan Doris. He's probably the number one for me at 6. I think Peter O'Mahony's probably second. Then if Doris was injured or didn't play, or if something happened, Jack Conan, Doris would move to 8. And so a bit of shuffling around in my back rows. Peter O'Mahony is second. If Doris and O'Mahony weren't there, and there's a lot of ifs and buts in this, and if you're playing James Ryan and Ian Henderson in the second row, well, I'd be thinking then you have to get Tadhg Beirne on the field and make sure he's on the field. He may well start and probably is the front runner to start in the second row. But I'd have him as the third on my list of number 6s. And then maybe Dan Levy, who hasn't played probably very, very little rugby in the last 2 years after that horrendous injury he had, and then had another setback when he came back. He's someone I'd love to see get back, and everyone I'd love to see to get back to get some sort of form. And if he was back playing well, you could easily play him at 7, 6 or 7. He's very physical and aggressive. So the 4 I have there are Caelan Doris, Peter O'Mahony, Tadhg Beirne and Dan Levy. People will argue and say, well, there's the back row is very tricky, lads, because number 8s can play 6, 6s can play 7s. You can mix and match there very easily. But if everyone's fitting well, I'd go Caelan Doris, Peter O'Mahony, Tadhg Beirne and Dan Levy.
Potentially, how good could Caelan Doris be in terms of the all-time great 6s?
Well, he's a full package, I think. He's so athletic. He's good line-out option. Great ball carrier, good at the breakdown, natural work rate, exactly what you want in a number 6. Is he the kind of, does he have that, does he have any weakness? Well, it's hard to find any weakness in his game as a rugby player, but I just think, does he need to get a little bit more aggressive and more physical? Possibly. He's such a talented footballer, but I think I'd have no kind of fears about him going up against any brute or any, aggressive pack that he'd play against, because he's such a natural footballer. He's brilliant, but I can find very little weakness in his game. I think his overall performance, and he's always been touted to be this good, and we saw the best of him in November, and hopefully we'll see that on a regular basis going forward with Ireland, whether it's at number 8 or number 6.
Quinny, how pleasing is it to see Doris come back at such a good level, given that he had to take time out with the concussion? He missed such an important part of the season that may well have cost him a place in the Lions if he'd been fit to go last summer. But he's come back brilliantly in this autumn series.
Yeah, it is. It's great to see. The way the game has gone, Will, the more footballers and natural footballers you can have in your team, the better. Obviously, as you want your forwards to have a bit of a hard edge as well. You want them to be aggressive, and you want them to have a presence in the field. But I just think to have the ability of someone who runs onto the ball so well, accelerates so well onto the ball, and I often see him making carries, and he's reload, getting back off the ground, the work rate to get back into position again, and look for another carry is remarkable. He's very similar in his tackle count. You know, he's just gets back up off the ground really, really quickly and wants more involvement. So it is great to see. He's a wonderful footballer and can offer so much in attack. And you know, we've had questions about the Irish attack in the last couple of years. Well, maybe I'm biased as a former back row, but I just think if you can get your back row right and get them with big involvements in the game, they can win games for you. They can change the course of the games with their moments, their tackles, their turnovers, the way they can stop the opposition. And this guy is the full package, really. I suppose we'll he'll be, because of those performances in November, you know, when you come up against a French pack and an English pack in the Six Nations, you'd be really hoping that that's the next step for him to really kind of show the world that this is what he can do on a consistent basis, and this is how good he is. So a lot of pressure on him, but it's great to see him back and playing really well.
Number 7, how much does Peter O'Mahony have left at this stage?
A fair bit. I've been very impressed with his form this season. I think he started the season with Munster, and you know, strange kind of setup for most teams had most of their internationals available, bar a couple of the Lions players. Munster didn't have that many. Peter O'Mahony wasn't on a Lions tour. I just think he's really important still, and you know, I watched him closely in the first couple of games for Munster, and he played really well. I liked the way he was going about his business, the involvements he had in the game. Obviously, his biggest strength is that breakdown and line-out work. But I just think if you're picking a team and you have Peter O'Mahony at your disposal and you can get the best out of him, and he's fit and gone through a good period of obviously of conditioning, and he's ready for action, I think it's hard not to consider him. And I think Andy Farrell will always consider him going forward, unless he has a really kind of dip in form. So look, I think he's a real option to move him, to play him as a 6 or a 7. Will he be frustrated and think, well, I'm more of a kind of a possibly a bench player now, when the other 3 that played in November are playing well? Well, he won't be pleased with that, but I think his impact and the performance against Argentina was top notch in November. Just on the number 6, lads, you can have bolters there, and I kind of was thinking of who outside of that 4 could come in. Well, Nick Timoney's been playing so well with Ulster, continuously getting man of the matches. Paul Boyle is someone that I like. I think I like his edge. I like the way he's improved in the last couple of years. And then there's a young guy. The chances are that, you know, the first 4 that I mentioned are probably, they're the options at 6 that Andy Farrell will look at. Like I say about Dan Levy, he needs to play more games and see him more consistently. But I'd love to see him getting back to somewhere near his best. But then if I was to pick 3 bolters, it'd be Nick Timoney, Paul Boyle, and I've been impressed with Cian Prendergast. He's one for the future.
Another man who played a bit of GA in his day.
Yeah, it helps, I think, that hand-eye coordination. But you know, he's someone I think has a lot of ability. He won't be involved in the Six Nations, but if he keeps progressing, so there's a lot of options there, and particularly, you know, right across the board in the back row.
I think you've given 7 names there at 6. What about 7? Josh van der Fleer is your number 1.
Yeah, well, the number 4, Johnny, the 4 I gave, and then I just thrown in a couple of bolters, guys who, you know, they're probably an honourable mention. I don't want to insult them, but they're fellas that if there was a number of injuries, that they would come into the mix, and I think they could do a job, particularly Timoney and Boyle. They've been in around the Irish squad for a bit now. Number 7, well, again, it's Josh van der Fleer, number 1. I have O'Mahony down as number 2, because I think that's what Andy Farrell will possibly look at. If something happened, Josh van der Fleer, well, it could be Caelan Doris and Peter O'Mahony on either side of the scrum very easily. Will Connor's number 3. Again, he's had a long-term injury. Someone who played in the Six Nations last year and was really impressive and had a great year with Leinster, but he's been out injured for a while. Very, very good player. And number 4 would be Conor Oliver. I think this guy deserves to start coming into the conversations now, because he's had a tough couple of years. Disappointment down in Munster, didn't get enough of opportunities for one reason or another, but he's a mainstay in that Connacht back row now, and I think his game has come on to another level. He's not the biggest guy in the world. He's definitely got stronger and more physical, but I think he's making a lot of carries. I think he made a lot of carries last week against Munster. He's very, very aggressive and has that little bit of a niggly edge that a good 7 would want, because I think he's probably used to getting the opposition maybe thinking that he is a little bit fragile, but he's not. He's as hard as nails, very good on the ball, and someone I think that deserves a mention. That if I saw Conor Oliver being picked for Ireland in the morning, I would be really optimistic that this guy can do a job here, that he can compete at this level. So he definitely deserves to start coming into the conversations, because he's consistently doing it for Connacht.
Penny and Hodnett are a couple of your bolters.
Yeah, well, look, they're top quality. Hodnett has been out for so long for Munster, but you saw the performance when he came back and played against Wasps. He's still very young, a very, very good player. And again, he's got to start playing consistently now for Munster, and which I think he needs to. And given what we saw last weekend, I think John Hodnett needs to. I think he needs a run in the team where he can actually express himself, build his confidence. And of course, Scott Penny is a very good player as well with Leinster. We've seen glimpses of him, but that depth chart in Leinster makes it more difficult for someone like Scott Penny. But they're definitely bolters and guys who, as I said about the other bolters, probably won't come into the mix in the Six Nations, but deserve to be talked about as potentially playing for Ireland in the future.
Quinny, I never thought we'd get to a point where you'd be naming an all Leinster back row at the top of your depth chart, but given the way Jack Conan played in South Africa in the summer, I think it's understandable he'd be first choice at number 8.
Yeah, well, I won't make any just to avoid any sort of confusion. Well, I'd love to be picking an all Munster back row, but we'll stick with reality, and it doesn't really matter. And I've said this all along. Of course, we all have our bias towards our provincial teams, but you've got to be honest and direct and straight. They're the best back row at the moment. Jack Conan is someone who kind of shot onto the scene a number of years ago with Leinster, got into the setup with Ireland. I remember being in Australia in 2018 on that Irish tour, and Jack Conan being frustrated and disappointed that he didn't really look like someone who was a real viable option to start, and certainly had the talent to do that, but just the way he's kind of the last 12 months have gone for him have been unbelievable, and I'm pleased for him, because I think that's his ability and that's where he's at, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the best of Jack Conan towards the end of the Six Nations last year, and that's not what I'm saying. There is Jack Conan hasn't played poorly. He's been very unlucky with some injuries. The opportunity in Leinster at times, with Max Teague and Caelan Doris and himself going for that number 8 jersey. I just think getting that opportunity last year at the end of the Six Nations and the performance against England, got him a spot on that plane to South Africa, and one of the best performances in a really dreadful line series. I think Jack Conan could come home from that tour with his head held high, and again his performance in November was top notch. So that All Blacks game, we kind of judge everything in that, but you're up near the top of the pile there when you're competing at that level, and I was just delighted that Conan came out and continued that form against the All Blacks. And, that's my back row. The starting back row would be, what finished against the All Blacks, or the team that played against the All Blacks, in Doris, Van der Fleer and Jack Conan. And they're the best players. And they're the people who have got the jersey at the moment. The danger sometimes when you have good performances previously, that you as a coach, Andy Farrell, will look back and say, well, because we haven't had a lot of rugby, I suppose, in the next week or two, unless some of these back rows do something remarkably bad or remarkably good, I think that's what the back row is going to be.
Yeah. And in terms of the conveyor belt coming through Coombs as well, Will, you want to give a mention to?
Yeah, I think Quinny Coombs has been one of the bright spots for Munster over the last couple of seasons. He's been a try-scoring machine right on the edge of this Ireland squad. And even though at number 8 it might be the 3 Leinster players, Conan, Doris, Deegan, I know you've got them all in the top 4, but Coombs probably deserves a chance during this Six Nations, given how he's played at provincial level over the last 18 months particularly.
Yeah, definitely. I think the problem for Gavin Coombs at the moment is, and it's just in the last couple of weeks, I think, is obviously the Cass performance and the Connacht performance for Munster. And when you have that sort of negative kind of run and people questioning the way the team are playing and all that kind of stuff, which has been fairly evident all week, players get kind of bracketed into a bad performance. I look back at the game a couple of times last week, and Coombs carried the ball 14 times in the game. That's his big strength, is his power and ability to make good carries for you. And obviously, as you said, score tries last season and the last couple of seasons. I think he had a great season last year with Munster and was so prominent, even in games that they struggled in. So he's got to find that little bit of spark again. He was in around the squad in November, and someone who, at this level, at the top level, I think he's made for it. He has that ability, and he's just struggling a little bit at the moment. So, I think it's the learning curve for a lot of these younger players, and like Jack Conan, Coombs will have his moments, and Josh Van der Fleer was in and out of the team a couple of times over the years. Things change very quickly, but Gavin Coombs has the ability to play at this level, and he's someone that I'm a big fan of. Max Deegan played a couple of times, has been in the Irish squad as well, so he's very, very talented as well. But I think if I was going in an order, I'd be going Jack Conan at 8. If something happens, Jack Conan, I think the natural inclination will be to move Doris to 8. Mm-hmm. And or maybe Coombs will come straight into 8. I don't know, but I think Doris would move to 8, and then you'd be having a Peter O'Mahony or a Ty Byrne or somebody else going as a 6. But there's a lot of talent there. And again, the bolters, Paul Boyle, I mentioned him again because he can play 6, 7 or 8. Rhys Ruddock and Nick Timoney. Rhys Ruddock is someone who's been, never let the side down really. And he wouldn't be too impressed with me to mention him as a bolter for Six Nations. But I just think that there's so much depth there. And even in my time playing, I remember the Grand Slam in 2009 thinking, I've no complaints there. I'm probably the 5th or 6th choice back row. When you have the likes of Leamy and Wallace and Heaslip, Ferris, it's hard to argue with that kind of quality. And I think Van der Fleer, Conan and Doris, even though they're a little bit different, some of them, there'll never be another David Wallace, I think, as a 7, because he was just such a brilliant ball carrier and so quick and so powerful as well. But they all have different attributes and strengths there, and I think it's exciting that there's so much depth there, and there's a lot of good players, unfortunately, that may not get picked this Six Nations or even to the upcoming tour to New Zealand in the summer.
Thanks a million for your time, Quinny.
Pleasure, lads.